I was eating leftover lasagna cold out of a Tupperware when Brad barged into my cubicle holding a printout like he'd just found a dead body in the break room. "Your name's on the patent," he blurted. No hello, no context. Just his pale little hamster face shaking with fake corporate outrage. I blinked mid-bite. "Yeah, I wrote the thing." He looked at me like I'd confessed to setting fire to the server room. That was the beginning of the end. Let's rewind a little. Before the LinkedIn warriors arrived with their buzzwords and Bluetooth earpieces, I'd spent the last 11 years buried in source documents and compliance reports, most of which had my initials at the bottom. Not because I was some ego-tripping gatekeeper, because nobody else wanted to be responsible if we ever got audited. I was the one who read the clauses, highlighted the subclauses, and actually understood the sub-subclauses. You know, the ones with the little Roman numerals that bite you in the ass when you're trying to sound smart in front of federal agencies. I don't do flashy. I don't do rah-rah. My coffee mug says I read contracts for fun, because I do. I've always liked the quiet power of being the person who knows exactly where the bodies are buried in a binder. So when our company secured a $250 million innovation grant tied to a patented security verification protocol, guess who was listed as the registered licensee? That's right, me, Elizabeth Jane Hart. Because under the terms of the grant, the tech was to be administered by someone with both security clearance and federal grant experience. My name's baked into the application, the usage rights, even the annual progress report templates. I'm the compliance ghost haunting the heart of the product. Now, most people in the company either didn't know that or didn't care. Legal knew, the original grant writer knew, but they left a year ago to start an organic almond butter co-op or something. Since then, I've been the lone librarian of our institutional memory, ignored, mildly resented, but absolutely essential. And that's how I liked it. Low profile, high control. As long as I stayed in my lane, nobody messed with me. Until Brad. Brad, with his barely buttoned shirts and the attention span of a mosquito in a wind tunnel. He was one of those fast-track hires, mid-level, MBA-scented, allergic to nuance. Got promoted straight out of a strategy offsite because he used the word synergy unironically during a deck presentation. The kind of guy who thinks compliance is something you outsource to India or slap a checkbox on in Notion. He was tasked with streamlining IP disclosures, which apparently meant going on a witch hunt for anything that didn't fit into his PowerPoint slide with 3 bullet points and a stock photo of a handshake. So when he saw my name on the patent filings tied to the tech grant, his tiny lizard brain whispered the word, moonlighting. I told him calmly twice that it was part of the grant requirement, that I'd disclosed it from day one, that the company's own legal counsel had submitted the registration. He nodded like he was listening, then turned around and reported me to HR like a toddler telling on someone for coloring outside the lines. Anyway, if you're still with me, go ahead and hit the subscribe and like buttons. It really does help our team bring you more stories like this. Plus, it gives me an excuse to keep telling tales where the quiet ones win. Back to the story. The thing is, I wasn't panicking. I'd seen people like Brad before. They come in loud, swing their weight around, and leave a trail of broken workflows behind them like breadcrumbs. I assumed someone up the chain would explain things. That maybe the VP of Ops, or at least someone with access to the original grant binder, would connect the dots before anything irreversible happened. I assumed wrong. There's a particular kind of weariness that sets in when you realize the people now running the show not only don't understand the system, they actively disdain anyone who does. Brad didn't want clarity. He wanted credit for cleaning house. And I was a perfect target. Older, quiet, tucked away in a corner office with my wall of 3-ring binders and my post-it collection that could probably trigger a mild anxiety attack in most UX designers. The writing was on the wall, in the patent and the licensing form, but no one was reading. So I sat back, filed my documentation like always, and waited. Turns out, I didn't have to raise my voice to make noise. The system I built was already louder than any memo Brad could draft, and it had teeth. The Monday they arrived, they didn't even bother to introduce themselves properly, just marched into the bullpen like they were touring a startup they planned to gut for parts. They all had those job titles that sounded like they were generated by an AI trying to be trendy. Innovation Catalyst, Experience Flow Architect, VP of Cultural Velocity. Half of them were under 30, all of them were overdressed, and none of them had the foggiest idea how anything actually worked. They were sent by the board, apparently. New investment coming in, new vision, new structure, blah blah blah. A flattening of departments, which in real terms just meant firing the people who made things run and replacing them with people who talked about running things. I watched them move through the office like they were casing the joint, pausing to sneer at paper files, scoffing at anything not stored in the cloud, and asking things like, who even uses binders anymore? My desk must have looked like a crime scene to them. I had 3 monitors, 2 staplers, and one ancient but reliable desktop tower that sounded like a small lawnmower when it booted. And binders, so many binders they were color-coded by audit year. I saw one of the new girls take a picture of my cubicle and whisper, "This is giving grandma's tax season." Brad slithered into my life around day 3. He was officially titled IP Alignment Officer, which sounds like something you'd name a chiropractor for trademarks. Unofficially, was a snitch with Wi-Fi. His favorite hobby was scrolling through old documentation and firing off Slack messages like, "Who approved this line item?" Or "Can we sunset this process?" Usually for things he didn't remotely understand. And then he found the patent. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't secret. It was filed with the Department of Defense, linked to our grant, and signed off by legal, compliance, and the board back when people actually read what they were signing. It listed me as the registered licensee and technical steward. Not out of vanity, because I was the one who architected the damn verification system, configured the audit trails, and met the compliance deadlines like my life depended on them. Which, fun fact, sometimes it did. Brad cornered me near the copy machine. "We've got a problem," he said, holding the printout like it had anthrax on it. "You didn't disclose this IP." "I did," I said, barely looking up. "It's part of the tech grant. It's been in the system for years. Legal filed it. You're listed as the owner. I'm listed as the licensee under federal terms. That's how the grant was structured. The company's the grantee, I'm the designated user." He blinked. "That's not how we do things now. Then maybe you should check how federal compliance still does them," I said, and I'll admit, maybe I let a little edge into my voice. That's when he said it, that smug, line in the sand garbage line. "You're either with the team or you're not." Not a team, the team, his team, the one with no memory, no paper trail, no clue. I didn't say anything. Just looked at him like you look at a kid trying to plug a USB stick into a toaster. I'd seen this breed before. They live in short sprints and pitch decks. They confuse confidence for competence. They think history is a nuisance and documentation is an obstacle. And worst of all, they believe their ignorance is some kind of innovation. What rattled me wasn't the accusation. God knows I'd been called worse by better. It was the speed, the way things were shifting underfoot. There was no review, no back-channel clarification. Just knee-jerk suspicion, followed by threats delivered like gospel. By Thursday, half my responsibilities had been reassigned without a word. My name disappeared from 2 team rosters. My access to the project management platform was temporarily suspended pending role clarification. Nobody said it directly, but I was being ghosted by my own job. I sent 2 emails, one to legal just to document the encounter, one to HR clarifying my role per the original grant documentation. No reply. At that point, the alarm bells weren't deafening, they were distant, more like a smoke detector in a locked room. Something was burning, but I wasn't sure if it was my desk or the whole damn floor. I went home that night and dug out the original grant file. I still had the hard copy, of course I did, flipped to the clause with my name on it. Usage rights contingent upon licensee's active employment status. Termination of licensee shall result in immediate suspension of technology access until reassignment is approved through federal review process, 90 days minimum. 90 days. That little number sat there on the page like a slow fuse waiting to hit the dynamite. I ran my fingers over the seal. The document still smelled like toner and panic. Let them keep swinging. I wasn't going to flinch. Not yet. They didn't even have the decency to wait until the end of the day. At 2:41 p.m. on a Friday, the HR assistant, not even the director, pinged me on Teams with a cheerful, "Hey Elizabeth, can you pop into 4B for a quick chat?" "Sure, kid. Let me just pack up 12 years of institutional memory and make sure I've logged out of my own future first." Room 4B smelled like hotel soap and whiteboard markers. Brad was already sitting there, arms folded like he was bracing for turbulence on a plane he shouldn't be flying. The HR rep, Tanya, I think, though I'd never heard her speak above a whisper, looked like she wanted to disappear into her keyboard. Brad took the lead, of course. "We've confirmed a conflict of interest," he said, flat as a spreadsheet. "You failed to disclose your involvement in an external intellectual property arrangement that could compromise company security." I tilted my head. "You mean the federal innovation grant you inherited and never read?" Tanya coughed. Brad didn't blink. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Your badge has been deactivated." That's when the security guard stepped into the room. I looked at him, Donnie, nice guy, 2 kids, used to trade chili recipes with me in the break room, and he winced like he knew this was wrong but couldn't stop it. "You can collect your personal items under supervision," Tanya said. I started to speak. Something calm, something clarifying. But Brad cut in before I got a full breath. "This isn't a debate. We've got to move quickly on this." "Of course you do, Brad. Wouldn't want to give due process time to catch up." I stood up, smoothed my blouse, walked out without a word. Let Donnie trail behind me like a reluctant shadow as I packed up a cardboard box of framed audit certifications, a mousebed shaped like a cat, and my backup flash drive labeled Patent Docs Final. The whole floor was quiet, like the building itself was holding its breath. A few heads poked up over cubicle walls. Eyes darted back to monitors. Nobody said anything. My badge didn't work at the front exit scanner. Donnie had to override it manually. By 3:12 p.m. I was out on the sidewalk, sun too bright, sky too cheerful for the sucker punch I'd just taken. I didn't cry, not because I'm brave, but because I was busy thinking. There's a strange thing that happens when you've been in compliance long enough. You start to think in clauses. I could practically hear the grant agreement humming in the back of my head like a hymn I didn't know I remembered. Once home, I put the box on the kitchen table, poured myself a glass of ginger ale, sat down at my laptop, and logged into the Federal Tech Grant portal using my secure ID. The dashboard loaded. My license status. Active in good standing, I clicked through to the status change of licensee form. Checked the boxes. Ballot box with check no longer employed by grantee organization. Ballot box with check no longer authorized to act as technical steward. Ballot box with check transfer of usage rights pending federal approval. Reason for status change. Employment terminated without reassignment. Submitted. A soft chime. Then the confirmation screen loaded with a bright yellow banner across the top. Patent usage suspended pending review. Please allow 90 days for reassignment approval. There it was, in black and white. The product killing, funding freezing, clause activated truth. The technology their entire $250 million funding round hinged on was now untouchable. By firing me without reassignment or clearance, Brad had triggered the one clause I always prayed we'd never need. The emergency brake, the system lockout, the federal timeout, no access, no updates, no compliance certification, no funding close. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and for the first time in years I allowed myself a full, unfiltered exhale. They wanted fast? Fine. Let's see how fast the panic sets in. It started with a missed call at 7:43 a.m. on Saturday, then a text from an unknown number. Hey Elizabeth, this is Monica from Product Ops. Brad said there's a doc missing from the grant archive. Can you hop on a Zoom today? No salutation, no apology, just the casual assumption that I'd still be on call for the machine that just chewed me up and spit me out. By 9:15, I'd silenced my phone. I wasn't in the mood to help them out of the grave they were so eager to dig. I made pancakes. Full-fat buttermilk ones with way too much maple syrup. Sat on the couch in my robe and rewatched an old documentary about Cold War encryption protocols. You know, the kind of cheerful thing compliance nerds do to unwind. Meanwhile, the quiet part of the storm was building inside their walls. I know how these things go. You pull one card out of the base and suddenly the whole tower's listing to one side. The product lead, Sarah, sent me a chirpy LinkedIn message around noon. Something like, hey, quick cue, do you remember where the approved compliance map lives for the authentication module? We've got a thing on Monday. Be a huge help. Ty, I didn't respond. Not out of spite, out of clarity. I wasn't theirs anymore. And if they had read even half of the documents I left behind, they wouldn't need to ask me where to find their own lifeboat. But then came the message that hit just right. The one that told me the edge of the cliff was closer than they realized. It was from the CTO. Need you to confirm Clause 7B ownership on the DoD patent, not seeing it reflected in our current access log. Think there's a gap. Call me? Oh, honey, it's not that there's a gap, it's that you don't own the ground you're standing on. Clause 7B was the heartbeat of the patent, the verification logic, the security routing, and the federally certified framework that underpinned the entire product. It was also the clause that stated, quite clearly, that all usage rights were contingent upon active stewardship by the registered licensee, which, as of 3:12 p.m. Friday, was no longer me. I left the message unread. Let the timestamp bake into his anxiety like a low-grade fever. Instead, I pulled out the hard copy of the licensing agreement again, flipped to the back where the compliance triggers were listed. There it was, plain as day, highlighted in faded orange ink from a marker I hadn't used in years. Termination of licensee shall auto-flag all associated technology for review. No further usage permitted until substitute licensee is approved. Estimated processing time, 60-90 business days. Auto-flag, not manual, not conditional, automatic. The clause wasn't about punishing terminations. It was about protecting the integrity of federally backed technology. The moment I submitted that change, the wheels had started turning. Quietly, inexorably, like a slow federal avalanche. I opened my laptop, logged back into the grant portal. Status, under review licensee reassignment pending. Access, revoked from all associated systems. That included the source code repository, the compliance certifier, the integration tool, the escrow validation platform, everything. And they didn't even know it yet. Not fully. But they would. They'd start to feel it Monday morning when the escrow checklist failed to verify a required compliance token, when the audit trail refused to update, when the grant monitor reached out to say, there's been a status change. By Sunday, they'd likely be halfway through their Slack channels, hunting through old emails like archaeologists trying to decipher hieroglyphs. But it wouldn't matter. They'd missed their window. The hammer wasn't falling fast, but it was falling, and there wasn't a damn thing they could do to stop it. I closed the file, took a long sip of my coffee, and let that grim little smile settle on my face. Let the trials begin. Monday morning bloomed like every Monday does, overpriced lattes, overconfident calendars, and a company full of people who thought they were about to become rich. I walked to the cafe 2 blocks from my apartment, the one with the chipped paint and the moody barista who plays jazz even when no one's listening. I ordered my usual black coffee, extra hot, no fuss. Sat by the window. Outside, the world looked deceptively normal joggers, buses, someone in a suit dropping their breakfast burrito into a storm drain. But inside, in a boardroom roughly 37 floors above ground level, the countdown had begun. This was the morning they'd circled in red $250 million signing ceremony, the funding close, the culmination of months of pitch decks, staged demos, and champagne that had been chilling since last quarter. The lead investor was dialing in from New York. The board was already seated. The escrow agent had the wire queued up. I wasn't there, of course, but I didn't need to be. The system would speak for itself. Back in the cafe, I scrolled through the business news on mute. One headline caught my eye: Boom in verified tech. Compliance is the new kingmaker. Oh, honey, you have no idea. I sipped my coffee and refreshed the federal portal again. Status: reassignment pending. All usage suspended. Tick, tick, tick. Meanwhile, in that plush, soundproof boardroom, I imagine Brad was already halfway into his thank you to everyone who believed in the vision nonsense, probably grinning like a boy who thought he'd gotten away with stealing the family car. Lead investor would have been nodding politely, one eye on his calendar, one finger poised over the e-signature button. And then came the moment. The escrow agent opened the compliance checklist, the one that confirmed every legally required condition for the transfer of funds. It's a simple document. 16 boxes, initials, dates, one digital signature per line. But line 5, that's the kicker. Line 5, verification of licensee in good standing for IP asset registry. That's where the machine hiccuped. That's where the silence started. I imagine the agent frowning, scrolling back up, then back down again. Hold on, he said slowly. We've got a conflict here. Pause, the kind that thickens the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. Line 5. The registered licensee status was changed as of Friday afternoon. It's flagged. Licensee not in good standing. Cannot verify usage rights. In the cafe, I took another sip. Still too hot, still perfect. They would have tried to scramble, of course. Whispered to legal. Tapped at iPads, pulled up outdated PDFs. Brad probably started saying something about legacy roles or technicalities. But there are no technicalities in federal grant compliance. Only terms. And when you break one, the whole machine stops moving. The escrow agent didn't yell, didn't accuse. He just cleared his throat and read from the terms. In the event that the registered licensee is no longer employed at the grantee organization and no approved reassignment has been filed, usage rights are suspended. Funds may not be released pending resolution. I could picture the blood draining from the CEO's face, the board shifting uncomfortably, Brad looking around like someone had just told him his house was built on a sinkhole. No alarms, no sirens, just the slow, suffocating realization that something critical had gone very, very wrong, and all of it triggered by a woman they walked past for decades like I was part of the office furniture. I stirred my coffee absent-mindedly. The jazz had shifted to something soft and aimless. No part of me felt guilty, not even a twinge. They didn't just lose the patent. They lost the right to pretend they knew what they were doing. The first crack came in the form of a stammer, a slight hitch in the escrow agent's voice as he reread line 5 for the third time, then a nervous shuffle of papers from someone on the board. Must be a system error, the CEO said, voice already thinner than usual. He smiled, the kind of smile reserved for traffic stops and marriage counseling. I'm sure it'll clear up in a moment. It didn't. Instead, the screen refreshed. Red highlight. Status: invalid licensee not in good standing. The lead investor adjusted his glasses, leaned slightly toward the webcam. So who, he paused, slowly enunciating, was the registered licensee on the IP grant? The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin itch. The CTO, Nathan, who usually spoke only in code and acronyms, mumbled without looking up Elizabeth Hart, product compliance. The investor's eyes narrowed. You mean the Elizabeth Hart whose employment was terminated Friday afternoon? No one answered. The CEO swallowed hard. There's got to be a workaround. Some delegation clause or there's not, the investor said flatly. I read the grant myself before we committed. The licensee must be an active employee of the grantee. Full stop. We didn't reassign her, Nathan admitted. We didn't think. The sentence hung there like a noose. From the far end of the conference table, a junior legal intern, maybe 23, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, spoke without raising her eyes. We didn't vet the termination list. Heads turned. She flinched under the weight of a dozen stares but continued. There was no compliance review of staff changes before Friday's layoffs. We just implemented the restructure. The CEO looked like he'd been slapped. Who signed off on that list? Brad was nowhere to be seen. Of course he wasn't. Panic spread across the room like gas leak fumes, silent, invisible, choking. One pulled out a laptop. Another whispered into their phone. Legal was already drafting a statement. PR was likely crafting a story about a technical delay and licensing clarification, but everyone knew it was already too late. The investor leaned back, eyes locked on the CEO. We can't wire anything without valid usage rights. The grant's terms are federal. There is no grace period. The CEO tried one last Hail Mary. Maybe we can reach out to her. Ask her to, she's not your employee, the investor cut in. Which means she doesn't owe you a response. Doesn't owe you anything. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was fatal. All those champagne bottles waiting on ice in the break room, all the bonus projections in Q2 planning, the celebration playlist someone had queued up on Spotify, gone, because they fired the wrong woman. And nobody in that room could undo it. The irony dripped off the ceiling like condensation. For years, they joked about how Elizabeth never said much, how she never wanted a seat at the table. And now, without her, the table itself had vanished. The intern, bless her, tried one more question. Should I pull her file for review? No, the investor said quietly. Pull the termination documents. I want to see exactly who made this decision. And when. As the screen behind them flashed escrow paused compliance flag active, the CEO closed his eyes for a moment too long. Outside the boardroom, the rest of the office buzzed with clueless optimism, still high on the idea that millions were about to rain down. Inside, dread bloomed like mold in the air vents, because this wasn't just a hiccup. It was the echo of a mistake, one they couldn't contain, one that started the moment they decided knowledge was replaceable. And now, the clock was ticking, loudly, mercilessly, and right over their own graves. My phone rang for the first time at 10:22 a.m. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The caller ID just read unknown, but the timing was a dead giveaway. The second call came 5 minutes later. Legal. I recognized the number, Shauna Wexler, sharp suit, sharper tongue, usually too busy to say good morning unless someone was getting sued. Then came Brad, of course. He didn't bother with a voicemail, just kept calling every 7 minutes like a man trying to rewind time through persistence. I silenced the phone, set it face down on the table, laced up my walking shoes and stepped outside. It was unseasonably warm. The kind of crisp, golden morning that makes you believe the universe occasionally enjoys irony. I walked through the park by the old reservoir, the one with the rusting benches and the dog owners who act like their poodles are Navy SEALs. Golden retriever puppy trotted up to me and dropped a tennis ball at my feet like a peace offering. I smiled, gave it a toss. The dog bounded away, unbothered by the global implosion I was currently orchestrating through non-action. Because here's the thing about silence, it scales better than rage. Back in that boardroom, I knew what was happening. They weren't having a meeting. They were having meetings about meetings, trying to find a scapegoat with just enough plausible deniability to shield the top brass from investor wrath. But there was no scapegoat this time. Just a trail of approvals, signatures, and Slack messages all pointing in one direction. Brad, the CEO, the system that thought experience meant replaceable. I sat down on a bench facing the fountain and checked my voicemail. The messages stacked up like guilty confessions. Shauna's voice was tight, measured. Elizabeth, you'd appreciate a return call to discuss a possible amendment to your termination documentation. There may be flexibility. Translation, we need you to unfuck what we broke. Brad's message came next. It was mostly stammering. A lot of look, this might have gotten escalated faster than it should have, and we're all just trying to move forward here. He said the word team 4 times. I deleted it without finishing. The last voicemail was from the board chair, Arthur Levinson, a man I'd spoken to exactly once in my career, and only then to explain why annual compliance review wasn't a suggestion. His message was pure white-collar panic, wrapped in velvet. Elizabeth, I've been informed of some oversight regarding your departure. I believe we've made a grave miscalculation. I'd like to open a dialogue as soon as you're available. I deleted that one too. Let them sit in it. Let the silence stretch long and thin, like a wire pulled tight across a canyon. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was simply giving them exactly what they gave me: absence. Inside the company, I knew the cracks were becoming fractures. The investor's response wouldn't have been subtle. Probably one sentence, maybe two, something like, until this is fixed, you get nothing. Those 6 words might as well have been carved into granite. No money, no press release, no handshakes. Just the cold hum of compliance locking down a system they never bothered to understand. Somewhere, someone was probably trying to reverse engineer the license terms, hoping to find a loophole, but there weren't any. I wrote most of the audit documentation myself. I know every clause, every cross-reference, every chapter disguised as a footnote. I was the trap, and now I was out of reach. I leaned back, closed my eyes, listened to the fountain burbling behind me. Let them call, let them sweat. Because in this moment, my greatest weapon wasn't access. It was silence. The second emergency board meeting wasn't even on the calendar. It was scheduled via text. No agenda, no catering, no pretense of control. Just a panicked scramble of suits and bad coffee, all shoved into conference room like passengers waiting for news of a delayed flight that's never arriving. The screen at the front blinked open to the grant portal's legal page, line after line of federalese that most of them hadn't read since the grant was filed. Legal had finally found the clause. Clause 7b, paragraph 3, the part I'd highlighted 3 years ago in neon green and begged them to engrave into their skulls. A junior counsel read it aloud, slowly, as if hoping each syllable might change into something more forgiving. The patented IP under grant hash 241GV is non-transferable. Only the registered licensee may operate the system. If terminated, usage ceases immediately until the licensee is reinstated or a substitute is appointed and approved through the Federal Review Board. Estimated review period: 90 business days. Silence followed so absolute you could hear someone's stomach growl. The lead investor leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low and lethal. Who did you fire? The question landed like a gavel. The CEO looked down at the table, suddenly fascinated by the grain of the laminate. His mouth opened slightly, no words, just a gulp of air like he was drowning. No one spoke. Brad's chair sat empty. He hadn't shown up. One of the board members scanned the room. Where is Brad? No answer. The HR director shuffled papers nervously. He's on leave. Medical, I think. Convenient, the investor snapped. Another board member, Sandra, CFO of a fintech firm and known for her tolerance level of 0, leaned in. So let me get this straight. You had one federally registered licensee tied to a $250 million funding round, and you terminated her without reassignment? The CTO nodded mutely. Sandra pointed at the screen. You do understand what 90 business days means in startup time? A murmur spread across the table like infection. The COO tried to offer a band-aid. There might be an appeal process. Maybe we can fast-track it. There is no fast-track, the legal director interrupted. It's federal. You don't fast-track federal unless you have clearance and congressional pull, and we don't. The investor tapped the table with his knuckles. Once, twice, and stilled his hand, so let me rephrase. You fired the only person holding the keys to the technology, and now the entire product is in limbo for at least 3 months. No one corrected him. He turned to the CEO, and you didn't know? The CEO finally spoke, barely above a whisper. She was quiet. I didn't realize she was quiet, the investor repeated, almost amused. And she had more power than all of you combined. Let that sit for a second. The intern from earlier, the same one who'd spotted the unvetted termination list, was hunched over a laptop, scrolling furiously. She didn't say anything, but the clicking of her keyboard was the loudest sound in the room. The investor stood, straightened his jacket. This isn't a delay, it's a breach. You've violated the terms of the grant. We now have to disclose this to the Oversight Committee. When word gets out that your platform doesn't have valid usage rights, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The CEO finally looked up. We'll reach out to her, try to make it right. The investor raised an eyebrow. You think she'll come back? Again, no one answered because they knew. I was done being the quiet one in the corner. Now I was the ghost in their machine. And ghosts don't answer calls. The boardroom was dead silent when the lead investor finally spoke. His voice wasn't angry. It was worse, dispassionate, surgical. Cancel the transfer. Alert our attorneys. The words hit harder than a tantrum ever could. There was no yelling, no dramatic speeches. Just a billionaire calmly instructing his legal team to detonate the deal from orbit. He turned toward the CEO, who now looked like he'd aged a decade in the last 10 minutes, and delivered the final autopsy note. Your platform doesn't own its tech. You just fired the only person who did. The CTO started to speak, stopped. Nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. The escrow agent didn't flinch. Just methodically closed his laptop and said, almost gently, transaction void. Void, like the celebration playlist still sitting in the breakroom queue, like the performance bonuses tied to the close, like the expansion plan they'd announced in last week's town hall, complete with fake grins and recycled mission statements. Every illusion they'd built over the last 6 months collapsed with a single status change in a federal database. Not by sabotage, not by revenge show or whistleblower exposés, just compliance, just me doing my job. They could blame Brad all they wanted. But Brad was a symptom, not the sickness. The real infection was arrogance. The idea that experience is just overhead, that history is a weight, not a foundation. They found out otherwise on camera, in front of their investor, with no time to lie their way out, and I was exactly where I wanted to be, at home, barefoot, the sun casting a soft stripe of light across the kitchen table, a half-finished mug of mint tea beside me, still warm. I opened my laptop to check the grant portal, one last time. Status, reassignment pending. Estimated time, 89 business days. The countdown had started. A soft chime pulled my attention to my inbox. One new message, from lead investor at, calm subject, would you be open to a conversation? No apology, no explanation, just the slow, careful language of someone who knows they're speaking to the last person standing. I hovered over the message, then closed the tab, didn't delete it, didn't reply, just closed it. Some victories don't need confetti. Some revenge doesn't need a monologue, sometimes. Silence is the perfect sound for a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. I lifted my mug. Took a long sip, let the steam wash over my face. Outside, a bird chirped once. Somewhere in a boardroom, a CEO wept into his NDA, and I enjoyed my tea. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.